It is somewhere past 3 in the morning, and you are awake again. The house is quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you can hear your own pulse. Your heart is moving faster than it should for a body that is only lying still in the dark. You are not afraid of anything standing in the room with you. You are afraid of the phone call that has not come yet. You are afraid of the scan results, the unopened envelope, the empty chair at the table that used to be full. Almost everyone alive has lain awake in that same dark, and almost no one says it out loud the next morning. You learn to carry it quietly. You smile at work. You say, "I'm fine," when people ask, and the fear stays lodged in your chest like a stone. Nearly 4,000 years ago, a man stood outside his tent under that same enormous dark, feeling the exact thing you feel tonight. His name was Abram, and he was old, and he had just won a war he never wanted to fight. 4 kings had carried off his nephew Lot, and Abram had chased them across the desert and brought his family home alive. He had cattle and servants and more wealth than his father ever dreamed of, and he had a wound that none of it could touch. He had no son, no heir, no future with his name still alive in it, and he was running out of years to change that into that dark. A voice came to him in a vision. The first words were not, "I have a plan," and they were not, "Everything will be fine." The first words were these, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield." That was the first time in all of Scripture those 2 words were ever spoken to a frightened human being. Those same 2 words would echo through the rest of the Bible, all the way down to its final pages. Here is the strange part, and it is the thread that holds this entire story together. The very last man in the Bible to hear the words, "Fear not," heard them on a prison island. They were spoken to him by someone he had watched die with his own eyes. How a dead man came back to speak those 2 words is exactly where all of this is going. You have probably heard somewhere that the Bible says fear not 365 times, 1 for every single day of the year. That is not true. And in a moment, I will show you the real number, because the truth tells a far better story than the myth ever did. So we are going to walk through every place God says, "Fear not." The moments that built the pattern, in the order they actually happened. We will start on that first dark night with Abram, and we will end on a cold stone morning with a man named John. And by the end, you will see something most people read right past their whole lives. God almost never says fear, not to people who are safe. He says it to the cornered, the dying, and the ones standing at the very edge of something they cannot survive on their own. This is not a greeting card. This is not a soft word for an easy day. This is a command spoken straight into the worst moments a human being can be asked to stand inside. And it begins with an old man, a sky about to fill with stars, and a fear that sounds a great deal like yours. Start with the number, because you have almost certainly heard it. Somewhere along the way, someone counted the Bible and announced that fear not appears 365 times, exactly 1 for every day of the year. It is a beautiful idea. It is the kind of thing that fits on a coffee mug, a wall calendar, and a card you hand to a friend in a hospital bed. It is also not true, and it is easy to check for yourself. If you open an older translation, like the King James, and search for the exact words, "Fear not," you will find them fewer than 80 times. If you widen the search to the full command in every form, the "do not be afraid" and the "do not be dismayed" and the "have no fear," the number climbs higher, counted carefully. That command shows up more than 100 times in the Old Testament and around 44 times in the New. So the real number sits well over 100 and nowhere near 365. No matter which translation you are holding in your hands, here is what most people miss. You never needed 365 of them in the first place, because every one of those moments, from the very first to the very last, is built on the same hidden pattern. Once you have seen that pattern in 10 of them, you have already seen it in all of them. To find it, you have to know what word is actually sitting underneath the English on your page. In the Hebrew of the Old Testament, the phrase is two small words, altira. It grows out of a root, yare, that simply means to fear or to be afraid. It is the same word Adam reaches for in the garden when God comes looking, and Adam answers, I was afraid, so I hid. When God takes that word and puts a no in front of it, altira, it lands as a command. Do not be afraid. And when he says it to a whole crowd at once, the word stretches into a plural, altira, meaning do not be afraid. All of you, by the time you reach the New Testament, the language has shifted from Hebrew to Greek, but the command has not moved an inch. There, the words become mephobu. The root is phobio, and you already know it, because it is the word that gives us phobias. So underneath that gentle phrase on the page sits the exact word we still use for terror itself. This is not God pretending the fear is small. This is God walking straight up to the thing that terrifies you and speaking to it by name. Now line the moments up, one after another, and watch who actually hears these words. It is almost never the comfortable person on an ordinary afternoon with nothing on the calendar. It is the woman who cannot have children. It is the slave dying of thirst in the desert. It is the soldier surrounded, the exile far from home, the prophet lying face down on the ground. These words are spoken to people standing at the edge of something they cannot survive on their own strength. And the reason God gives them is never that the danger out there is small. The reason is always something else entirely. And that something is the whole secret we are chasing here. To find it, you have to go all the way back to the first time the words were ever spoken. Because that first time, God is not trying to calm an old man down and send him back to bed. He is about to ask Abram to believe something no reasonable man his age could possibly believe. And the way Abram answers will be counted to him that very night as the thing that makes him right with God forever. So God says, fear not, Abram, I am your shield. And then he does something that should make the fear worse, not better. He takes the old man out into the night and tells him to look up and count the stars. So shall your offspring be, God says, to a man with no children, and a wife long past the age of having them. And here is the line the rest of the Bible will keep circling back to page after page. Abram believes him, he looks at the impossible promise, and he trusts it. And Genesis says it was counted to him as righteousness. Then God seals it with a ceremony so old and so strange that we barely understand it now. Animals are cut in half and laid in 2 rows on the ground. In that world, 2 men would walk between the pieces to say, let this happen to me if I break my word. But Abram never walks the path. A deep and dreadful darkness falls on him. And while he sleeps, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch move between the pieces alone. God walks the path by himself. God takes the entire weight of the promise onto his own side, while the frightened old man simply watches. That is what fear not meant for Abram. It did not mean his problem was small. It meant God had bound himself to that man and was never going to let go. He would still wait years for the boy to be born. The fear did not vanish that night. But the one who walked the path had given his word. Years later, that promised boy finally arrives, and his arrival pushes another person straight out into the desert to die. Her name was Hagar, an Egyptian slave, and she had a son of her own named Ishmael. When the tension in the household finally breaks open, Abraham sends her away with a loaf of bread and a single skin of water out into the wilderness with her boy. The water runs out under the desert sun, the way water always does. Hagar sets the child down under a small bush, and then she walks away, because a mother cannot sit and watch her son die of thirst. She lifts her voice across the sand and weeps, the kind of weeping that has no words left in it. And the text says, God heard the boy. The angel of God calls down out of heaven and asks, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not. Then God opens her eyes, and she sees a well of water that had been there the whole time. Sit with the smallest detail in that scene. The boy's name Ishmael means God hears. She had named him that years before she ever needed it to be true. And in the worst hour of her life, that name turned out to be his rescue. Fear not did not airlift her out of the desert. It opened her eyes to the water she had been too afraid to see. The next person to hear these words inherited them, the way some of us inherit our parents' fears without ever choosing to. His name was Isaac, the promised son himself, now grown and married and living in a foreign land during a famine. He was surrounded by people who envied him, who stuffed dirt into his wells and pushed him from one place to the next. One night the Lord appeared to him and said something tender. I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you. Notice that God introduces himself by Isaac's father's name before he says anything else. Isaac is standing in his father's shadow, carrying his father's God and his father's fears at the very same time. And the reason God offers him is the same reason he always gives. Not the danger is gone, but I am with you. A generation later, the fear shows up again, this time in a very old man loading his whole life onto carts. His name was Jacob, Isaac's son, and he had just learned that the boy he believed was dead. Joseph was alive and ruling in Egypt. To reach his son, Jacob had to leave the one thing his family had ever been promised, the land beneath his feet. Egypt was where that future would one day curdle into 400 years of slavery, though Jacob could not have known that yet. On the road, God spoke to him in the visions of the night and called his name twice. Jacob, Jacob, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. And then the reason, one more time, I myself will go down with you, and I will surely bring you up again. The old man was not told the road ahead was safe. He was told he would not have to walk it alone. Now hold these 4 nights side by side and watch what they share. Every one of these fear nots is spoken at a border. At the exact moment, someone has to step into something they cannot control. A man stepping toward an impossible future. A mother stepping away from a dying child. A son stepping into his father's unfinished story. An old man stepping out of the only promise he had ever been given. And in nearly every one, God gives the same reason. And it is never the reason we would have written. He does not say the danger is small. He says, in one form or another, I am with you. That is the seed of the pattern. Hold on to it. Because the fear is about to grow much larger than one family. Jacob went down to Egypt with a single family of 70 people. By the time the story picks up again, that family has become a nation. And the nation has become slaves. 400 years passed. A new Pharaoh rose who had never heard of Joseph. And he looked at all those people and saw only a threat to be crushed. So he put them under the whip, in the brickyards, under a sky that never once said, fear not to them. For 4 long centuries, an entire people knew nothing but the sound of the overseer and the weight of the load. And now everything changes. The next time these words are spoken, they will not be whispered to one frightened man under the stars. They will be shouted to a terrified crowd of hundreds of thousands. There will be an army at their backs and a sea in front of them on the worst morning of their lives. They stood at the edge of the water with the dust of Pharaoh's chariots already rising on the horizon behind them. 600,000 men, plus women and children, packed against a sea they could not cross and an army they could not fight. They had been slaves their whole lives, and now it looked like freedom had marched them straight into a trap to die. The people turn on Moses and scream that he dragged them out into the desert to be slaughtered. And Moses says the words, except now they are not whispered to one man in the dark. Now they are shouted to a whole terrified nation. Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. This is the plural form of the command. Al tirau, fear not, all of you, every last frightened one of you. Then the reason, the same as always, only louder, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. The sea splits open that night. and they walk across the bottom of it on dry ground, between two standing walls of water. Fear not did not remove the army or the sea. It told them to stand still long enough to watch God carve a road through the impossible. That generation died in the wilderness, and the words passed down to the one man who had to take Moses' place. His name was Joshua, and he was handed an assignment that would terrify anyone: lead this people into a land of walled cities and trained armies. He had spent 40 years standing in the shadow of the greatest leader Israel had ever known, and now that leader was gone. So God says it to him 3 times in a single conversation, like a father gripping a son by the shoulders. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed. For the Lord, your God, is with you wherever you go. There it is again, hiding in plain sight. The cure for the fear is not a smaller assignment. The cure is a sentence, and the sentence is, I am with you. By now, you may have noticed that one phrase keeps surfacing underneath all of them, and it is worth slowing all the way down for centuries later, with the nation broken and carried off into exile in a foreign empire. God says it one more time through the prophet Isaiah. And here in Isaiah 41, he says the reason out loud more clearly than anywhere else in the whole Bible. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. In Hebrew, the heart of that line is 3 small words. Altira, kimchani. Altra you already know. It means do not be afraid. Ki means for, or because. Imcha means with you. And he means I am. So the literal shape of it is this: do not be afraid, because with you I am. The reason is not a thing God does for you. The reason is a place God stands, which is right next to you. Read it across the translations, and the same heartbeat is in everyone. The English Standard Version says, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. The New Living Translation says, I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. A frightened, defeated people are being told that the strongest hand in the universe is the one holding them upright. And hold on to that little Hebrew word, imshe, with you, because a few chapters earlier, Isaiah had already handed a coming child a name built from the very same idea. The name was Emmanuel, and it means God with us. The reason behind every single fear not was slowly turning into a person. But before that person arrived, the command had one last stop to make. One of the last men in the Old Testament to hear these words did not hear them from an enemy or a storm. His name was Daniel, an old man by now, who had been mourning and praying beside a great river for 3 weeks. Then he looked up and saw something no human body is built to look at. A man clothed in linen, with a face like lightning, eyes like flaming torches, and a voice like the roar of a crowd. Daniel says his strength drained out of him. His face went deathly pale, and he fell to the ground like a dead man. The men standing with him saw nothing at all, but raw terror seized them anyway, and they ran to hide. And out of that blazing, terrifying presence came 2 quiet words: fear not. Daniel. Then again, a moment later, as the prophet lay trembling in the dirt, O man greatly loved, fear not, peace be with you, be strong. Stop and feel the weight of this one. The thing that knocked Daniel flat on the ground was the exact same thing telling him not to be afraid. For hundreds of years after Daniel, the voice goes quiet. No angels, no visions, no fear, not anywhere in the dark. And then heaven opens up again, and this time it does not stop. An old priest named Zechariah is alone in the temple, burning incense, when an angel appears beside the altar and his whole body locks up in terror. The first words out of the angel's mouth are the old words: do not be afraid. Zechariah, your prayer has been heard. Months later, the same angel, Gabriel, steps into a young girl's room in a forgotten little village. She is poor, unmarried, and nobody important, and the sight of him leaves her shaking. And he says it to her too: do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. Not long after, A group of shepherds is sitting in a cold field at night, watching their sheep and thinking about nothing at all. The sky tears open with light. An angel stands over them. And Luke says they were gripped by a great fear. Hold on to the exact word there, because it is one of the most beautiful details in the whole Bible. The Greek word for their fear is phobos, the same root that gives us the word phobia. And the angel answers them with that very same root, turned into a command. Me phobesta. Stop being afraid. God does not tell them their terror is foolish. He picks up the exact word for their fear and speaks straight into the middle of it. Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy, which will be for all the people. For 2,000 years, those words had come from a voice in the dark, or an angel out of heaven, or a being of fire in a vision. But the child those angels were announcing would grow up and start saying them himself. One night, far out on a lake, the disciples are fighting a storm in the dark, soaked and exhausted and afraid. They see a figure walking toward them on top of the water, and they scream because they are certain it is a ghost. Then a voice comes across the waves, and it says two things at the same time. Take heart. It is, I do not be afraid. In Greek, it is I, is ego eimi. I am the exact name God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. The one walking on the water tells them not to fear, and he calls himself by the name of God while he says it. And then comes the morning the whole Bible had been leaning toward. Some women come to a tomb in the gray light to care for a dead body, and the ground shakes, and an angel is sitting on the rolled-away stone. The soldiers guarding the grave shake with fear and fall down like dead men. The same way Daniel fell, the same way the prophets always fell. But the angel turns to the women and says the old words, do not be afraid, for I know you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. And then, on the road, the man who was crucified meets them alive. And the first thing out of his mouth is the same command. Do not be afraid. Now stand back and look at all of them at once, from Abram all the way to this empty tomb. Every single fear not follows the same 3 steps, without one exception. First, a human being hits the edge of what they can survive. A closed womb, a dry desert. An army, a grave. Second, a presence arrives that is so overwhelming, it becomes the new thing to be afraid of. Third, that presence speaks 2 words, and the reason it gives is never that the danger is small. The reason is always who is standing there. This was never a command to feel less. It was never a trick for talking yourself calm. It was never about pretending the dark is empty. It was a hand reaching into the worst moment of a human life. And it was attached to someone who refused to leave. And watch how that someone keeps getting closer all the way through the story. To Abram, he was a voice in the dark. To Hagar and the shepherds, he sent an angel. To Daniel, he came as a being of fire in a vision. And then, at last, the voice grew a face, and hands, and feet that could stand on a storm and walk straight out of a grave. The reason behind every fear, not the I am with you that had been running underneath all of them, had finally become a person you could see, which brings us, at the very end of the Bible, to the one man the beginning pointed straight at. An old man named John, the last of Jesus' close friends, still alive, is exiled alone on a prison island called Patmos. He turns around and sees the risen Christ blazing like the sun, and John falls at his feet like a dead man, just like all the others before him. Then his right hand comes to rest on John's shoulder, the same kind of strong right hand Isaiah had promised, and a voice speaks the 2 oldest words in this entire story. Fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of death. John is hearing fear, not from the very man he had watched die on a cross with his own eyes. And this time, the words finally have everything in the world behind them. The one saying them had walked all the way into death, the last thing any of us truly fear, and then walked back out, holding its keys. That should be the end of it. If the man holding the keys of death looks you in the eye and says, "Fear not," then surely nothing can ever touch you again. And that is exactly the place where we read too fast. Because here's the thing we skip. Almost every single time these words comfort us. Fear not almost never meant that the hard thing was not going to happen. Go back and watch what came after the words. In life after life, and you will see it everywhere. Abram heard fear not, and then waited so many years for his son that he and his wife both ended up laughing at the idea. Hagar heard fear not by the well, and then she still had to raise that boy alone in a wilderness with no husband and no home. The disciples heard, "Do not be afraid out on the water," and almost every one of them would later be killed for the man who said it. Even John, on the island, heard fear not from the risen Christ, and then watched a vision full of beasts and plagues and people dying for their faith. We have quietly turned fear not into a soft thing we say to make the fear go quiet. We want it to mean the test results are clean, the marriage gets saved, the job is secure. The phone call brings good news. It never once meant that, not for a single person in this entire book. Look at the most tender fear, not of them all, and watch how fast the cost arrives. Gabriel tells a frightened teenage girl, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God." Favor with God. That sounds like the safest place a human being could possibly stand. But 40 days after her baby is born, Mary carries him into the temple, and an old man named Simeon takes the child in his arms. He blesses them, and then he turns to the young mother. He tells her this child is set for the falling and rising of many, and that he will be a sign people speak against. And then the sword. A sword will pierce through your own soul also. The fear not did not protect Mary from pain. It walked her straight toward a hill called Golgotha, where she would one day stand and watch soldiers nail her son to a cross. Favor with God did not mean the absence of the sword. It meant she would not have to face the sword alone. That is the part we miss when we read fast, and it changes everything about how these words land on us. Fear not is not a promise that the cancer is benign. It is not a promise that the storm turns around before it ever reaches the house. It is a promise about who walks into the storm beside you, and who is still standing there with you when the worst of it is finally over. There is one more thing hiding in the grammar of it, and it is easy to step right past. In both Hebrew and Greek, fear not is a command, not a gentle suggestion, but you cannot actually order a feeling to leave. No one has ever stopped being afraid simply because they were told to. So the command was never really aimed at the feeling in your chest. It was aimed at your feet and your hands, and the very next thing you were about to do. Fear not does not mean you will stop feeling afraid. It means you do not have to let the fear decide where you go from here. Mary felt the sword coming, and she went anyway. The disciples felt the cost, and they followed anyway. John felt the weight of the whole vision, and he wrote down every word of it anyway. Every one of them was still afraid, and every one of them walked forward, because the voice that said fear not had promised to walk forward with them. So come back to that dark room and that bed, and the 3 a.m. we started with, come back to you, lying awake with your heart pounding over the one thing you cannot fix. The number was never the point. It was never 365, and it never once needed to be, because the same pattern that held Abram in the dark is the one holding you tonight, and it has not changed in 4,000 years. When the fear comes for you, the answer is not going to be that the danger was never real. The answer is the same one every frightened person in this book finally heard. You are not alone in this. That was the reason underneath every single one of them, the I am with you that finally walked into the room as a person. And here is what makes that different now than it was for Abram, staring up at the stars. When God first said, fear not, it came as a voice in the dark that you could not see. By the end of the story, that voice had a face and a name and scars on its hands from the worst thing fear has ever done to anyone. The one who says fear not to you is not a stranger, calling down from a safe distance. He is the one who walked all the way into death. The very thing you lie awake dreading, and came back out the other side still speaking, that is the voice that meets you in your dark room tonight. So the fear in your chest may be real, and the danger may be real, and the morning may still be hard, but you are not facing it by yourself, and the one standing beside you has already been through worse and lived. We keep reaching for fear not like a charm, hoping it will make the frightening thing disappear. It was never meant to remove what you face. It was only ever meant to change who is standing beside you while you face it. So before you go, I want to ask you something, and I really do want your answer. Of all the people in this story, which fear not, do you most need to hear right now? Is it Abram in the dark, afraid the future has already passed you by? Is it Hagar in the desert, out of water, watching something you love begin to die? Is it Mary, handed a calling that came with a sword hidden inside it? Is it the shepherds, ordinary people whose ordinary night got interrupted by something far bigger than them? Or is it John on the island, alone, hearing the voice of someone he thought he had lost for good? Tell me in the comments, which one is you tonight, and tell me why. Because someone else reading is carrying the very same thing. If this helped you breathe a little easier, send it to one person, who is lying awake, afraid right now. They may need these 2 words more than you realize. And if you want to keep going deeper than the surface, where the Hebrew and the Greek and the history actually live, stay here with us. We will keep opening these words up together, one at a time, until they stop being something you read and start being something you can stand on.